Hello, and welcome to the Weshtern Philosophy Podcast. Two friends with oceans of notions discussing the unseen forces in our lives through the lens of music, mystery, and crack. We have a Patreon at Weshtern Philosophy Pod. Don't forget the H. If you're enjoying the show and would like to see it grow, you can join this or make a once-off donation via Ko-fi.com. Both links are in the show notes below. Today, we are joined by environmental consultant and author Féidhlim Harty to talk about our relationship with nature and our capacity for change and positive impact, all under the banner of potential.
Because the spreadsheets are telling us that we're all going down this valley, you know? Yeah, the spreadsheets are mad, but you can't fit love into the spreadsheet. And if you don't fit love into the spreadsheet, your equation is going to be wrong, you know? So the metrics that we're using to measure the state of the world are essentially, they're only measuring the past. They're not measuring the potentials. They're not measuring the future. They're also not measuring the change in the human heart. Do you know the capacity that we have to show up for one another and for the world generally? Personally, I'm really, really optimistic about the future because I think that this stranglehold of rigid separation is beginning to fall away. And as that falls away, you know, everything is to play for. Yeah, I mean, on so many different levels. The world is just, the world is crazy, the energies are shifting, there's just madness everywhere, things are speeding up. You know, some people are losing their jobs, the other people are pulling up the slack. You know, so it's just that everything is shifting, and that's exhausting in itself.
I think that this is all fabulous. I think that would all work.
Yeah, I think we've started, if that's okay, Féidhlim.
Cool. That was the topic I didn't want to talk about.
Okay.
Cool.
Got him, Anthony, another one for the gotcha journalists. Well done. Western philosophy.
Yeah.
Strikes again.
Well, cool. I will, whether this is in media res or whether this is pre-media res or whatever you would call it, I will welcome our guest today, Féidhlim Harty, who we have decided is, well, we haven't decided, he is an environmental consultant, a writer, a teacher, educator, and I feel very comfortable calling him a water whisperer, a man who, I remember somebody described you once, Féidhlim, I don't know, was it Katie or it might even have been our friend Sonia, they said you gave a talk on wastewater treatment systems. And I think Katie said it changed her life. She was like the most inspiring thing she'd heard in years. So real pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much, Féidhlim.
Great to be along. Thanks for the invitation.
So we were just talking about topics and stuff like that, Féidhlim, and how it's an interesting thing because like sometimes there's stuff you want to talk about and then sometimes there's stuff that you're like, oh, I really should talk about X, but sometimes like what's really alive in you is something else and maybe not the thing you want to be talking about. So I guess I'm going to ask you, Féidhlim, are we going to talk about, are we going to listen to the mind or the body on this one, Féidhlim? You know? Okay,
so, fair enough.
Yeah, and I will allow you to guide this. And how are you doing today? Where are you at? And what do you want to talk about?
Doing well.
Good.
Doing well today, which is good. And doing well these years. We moved out from Ennis to Lahinch, Kilshanny area about 3 years ago. And lads, do you know, pigs and shit, I think, comes to mind. You know, I just loving it, just being out in the birdsong, out around the trees, out on the land. It's just heaven sent. It's badly needed, do you know? So enjoying that. Good. Like every day we wake up, look out over the view of Mount Callan, and I just breathe in the landscape. It's just mad. Yeah, it's really great to be out there. Yeah. And so there's a level of calm that just wasn't there before, and you know, and that's just really nice, just to feel that in every single cell in the body.
And where's the calm coming from, Féidhlim? Is it the stability you have in your own place, or is it the specific place you're living in, or?
I think it's probably a combination of lots of things. There's a lot that's shifted for everybody in the last block of 5 years. You know, there's an awful lot that's changed. And so for me, it's being somewhere that I love. That's one thing, which is hugely important. It's being somewhere where I can have a conversation with the world around me all of the time. You know, just that ebb and flow of energy, of breath, of being, of all of that. I don't know, I'm not articulating that terribly well.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
So those are really important. It's also where we were before, there were big gardens, but it was a housing estate. So there were people around. And just that psychic noise of just having people there. And in a town as well, there's more radio frequencies going on, there's more masts and that type of stuff that just gets in the way of landing, of being. And just being out away from that. There was a friend staying and they were looking down through their phone for Wi-Fi signals, and we turned on the Wi-Fi so that they could tune in. And they were saying, is it this one? I said, there aren't any options. You're not going to find anybody else's.
It's the only Wi-Fi.
It's the only Wi-Fi, and it'll be off as soon as you're finished doing what you're doing. So there's that sense of freedom of the energy mind as well, just freedom from the radio frequencies that are all around. So all of that comes to, all of that comes into play.
Yeah.
And I just find it easier to breathe because it's more like what I grew up with. I look out across the valley, I see the view at the far side of the valley, I see the cars, the houses that are in the distance, and it's so familiar that there's a really landed, lovely sense. Do you know the way you always love the landscape that you grew up in?
I think that's very true.
And so it's very, very similar to that in many ways on a kind of a macro landscape level. And so that's a great sense of calm. And also the world has shifted so much. So my work has shifted in the last 5 years that, the world, I think the world we're in now, certainly from my perspective, the world we're in now is a very, very different place from where we were 5-10 years ago in terms of, I have a felt sense that the changes that we want to see in the world have already happened. And so we're on cleanup. And I find that such a relief because for a lot of my life, I was working from a place of fear. And so trying to show up in order to change the unchangeable. Like, how do you take on the whole structure of modern life? And try to win, And even that phrase is an old phrase. It's outdated. And it was outdated when they discovered quantum physics and Newtonian physics went out the window.
Yeah.
But I feel that in the last 5 years, for me, I'm suddenly tuning into that and noticing that the world has shifted.
When you said that, I just felt like, such a relief for something. When you said it, I was nearly like taking off my winter coat that I shouldn't be wearing in this fine weather or something. I was just like, it's mad to me always how our nervous system kind of clicks in. And when you said that, I was just like, he's
it's
right.
Okay. It's cool.
God, thank you. Well, I'm done. I'm sorted. First 5 minutes, we're sorted. No, but that's lovely. Like, thank you. Yeah. So we were just saying beforehand, I'm coming into this completely blank. Anthony's told me a little bit about a workshop he did recently, but can you give me and the viewers a little bit of a background? I always feel like this is such a standard interviewee trope, but I would love it actually.
Also, you keep thinking you're on TV. We don't have... Well, we have Larry. Larry watches us on YouTube and he's the only one.
Yeah, but he's the one who I'm most desperate to please.
Yes.
And listen.
There you go. Okay, so eco-visioning.
Yes.
So I suppose it's a long story, so we might as well start at the beginning. Yeah. So I went into business as soon as I graduated from college. I graduated in June 1996, and I set up as a consultant in July 1996, which I think is just a cool business plan for anybody who comes out of college. Just
I have no experience, but there we go.
Print your business cards and declare yourself a consultant. It's very cool.
And what was your degree? Sorry,
environmental science and technology. Yeah. So, and I went into an arena that was very, very niche. So I already had experience coming into that, and there were very few people in the country who had more experience. There were some, but very few. So I felt confident stepping into that space. And so I did reed bed design and constructed wetland design and eco-friendly sewage treatment work for a long block of time, basically. Let me see, eco-visioning. So the business started out as constructed wetland systems under the wider umbrella of environmental consultancy. But it was very much about looking for solutions. So, we have a problem. Wastewater is everywhere. How do we deal with that cheaply and effectively in a way that doesn't use loads of electricity? And so the obvious solution to my mind was reed bed systems in constructed wetlands, which are zero energy systems that work away using gravity and plants and microbes and all that. And they get water really clean, and that's all cool.
But they're quite complex, I'm assuming, to set up.
Not very.
No.
Not very. I mean, you can get things wrong.
Yeah.
And so, the definition of a consultant, it's somebody who's made more mistakes than anybody else in a very narrow field of study for longer than anybody else has. Yeah. So I've made lots of mistakes and also seen lots of mistakes. I come in to deal with the mess that other people have made from time to time and be able to tweak things and provide solutions and say, okay, this is the way we can move. But in about 2019, I suppose, 2018, 2019, the Quakers in Limerick said, can you come in and give us a talk? Because I'm a member of the community there. So can you come in and give us a talk? We want to know the 5 things that people can do to help the environment. So a nice, simple talk. We want to keep it really basic. And so I was thinking, well, what do you say to people when everything is broken? How do you sum it up in 5 things? So I looked at the whole subject and came up with 5 things. And one was living simply. If you live simply, you just have less resource footprint, less energy footprint, all of that kind of stuff, less food miles. The other is to feed the right wolf. So, do the things, spend your money in ways that actively build the world that you're wanting to create, rather than spending your money on the cheapest things, which actively build the world that is screwing us all up. So the third was community, hold hands, forge connections with your local organic supplier, with neighbours, with people who share interests, all of those things so that you can come together and realise that you're not isolated. Because when you listen to the mainstream news, you listen to the mainstream media and you think you're the only one in the world that actually gives a shit about the important things. And we're not. We all care about the important things. But for some reason, it's almost like the media's brief is to keep people as scared shitless as possible and as isolated as possible. And whether it is or whether it isn't is somebody else's business. Yeah. But if you were to write a brief, that one would fit. So that was that one. The fourth one was put them under pressure. Jack Charlton's great phrase. Just tell the government that that's not good enough. Tell big business, actually, you want something different. And increasingly, they'll respond. They're remarkably responsive, even as I acknowledge that they don't budge, quickly enough. So I know that there's that dichotomy. I do think we're in a scenario where there's a kind of an open door. The door is ajar. The door that we've been banging our head against, that's been locked for decades, I think is at the point now where we can put a bit of gentle pressure on it and it'll open. So I think that advocacy, while it's always been really important, is potentially more fruitful these years than it might have been in the past. And all the good things that we have in society have generally come from people stirring shit and saying, look, we want something different. So that was those 4. So this is a longish introduction. The 5th one is hold the vision. So if we can hold the vision of the world that we want, we're much, much more likely to create the world that we want.
Rather than pushing against the one.
Rather than pushing against, and also rather than holding on to a really clear vision of how awful it would be if the worst thing happened that we think might happen.
Sure.
And pushing against that. And holding that clear prayer of disaster, in our hearts. The idea that the brain is electrical and the heart is magnetic. If we hold that magnetism of fear, then we pull that in. I mean, the more research is done in quantum physics and in consciousness, the more we see that all of the things that we thought might have been really cool analogies seem to be true, rather than just analogies, which I just find it electrifying. I find it amazing. And so eco-visioning as an idea came from that idea that by holding a really clear vision of the future we want, we do 2 things. We step back from the fear in our own lives, which is hugely important, but it's also a practical, tangible thing that we can do in order to move into the future that we want. And then drawing on various other people who've done a lot of work in different areas. So Bert Hellinger, looking at the family constellation work, which you're familiar with, which I just found electrifying when I stepped into that space first. Absolutely loved it. That was one which we thought, let's look at this. If there's an issue that's biting in the room, we'll just set it up, and see what unfolds. So I did constellation training in 2010, and so it's just nice to have that that background that we can bring into it. The other was Joanna Macy and John Seed, their work, and just pulling in the voices of the different animals and the different plants and fungi and that kind of stuff, and giving them voice, giving them a space in the room to bring that voice of nature, which, you know, doesn't often get a look in, doesn't often have space in the room. And then Eleanor brings her own healing practice into the space, and her, you know, her work with mediumship and that type of stuff. She can bring that in, and just a really clear sense of energy, and the energy in the room and holding that space. And with the meditations that we do, to, I suppose, to build that future we want, that really grounded space is brought in very nicely by Eleanor with her work, bringing that in. So those things come together, and at the end of the day, I'm hoping that you were at one of the workshops. I'm hoping that communicates itself and produces something tangible.
It was so practical, Féidhlim. You know, you're talking about how you feel like advocacy, you know, something has shifted, that advocacy is more effective now than it's ever been. I really strongly believe that there is a natural inclination to what you are facilitating that is blocked. So it is not like, here is Féidhlim Harty's 5-step process to reconnecting with nature. It's not that. It's actually that there is something that we want that we don't know what it is. And there are ways into it. And it's this lovely sideways angle on advocacy and climate work and so on, where, like you said, instead of saying, well, here's the data, we see sea levels rising, we see this going down, and therefore this could, if we project into the future, we know this will happen, and therefore we need to, you know, and it's, like you said, it's a disaster, a prayer for disaster, you know.
Such a good line.
And it's, and this is, I know it's a weird thing. It reminds me of Inception, you know, the movie Inception, where they go down to the deepest level and they're trying to get this guy to change his mind. They're trying to get him to break up his father's company. And they're just like, why don't we just tell him, why don't we make him just hate his dad and make him break up the company as a fuck you to his father? And they're like, no, negative motivation is never as powerful as positive motivation. And I really believe that's true. So in the eco-visioning workshop, we and one thing I'll say is just straight up top, I found you were excellent at facilitation and Eleanor was excellent at holding space.
Thank you.
And in my head, I'd never thought about what the difference between those two was, but you were very good at putting a structure on things, a framework on things, and Eleanor was really good at feeling what was happening in the room, and both of you worked really well together. There were meditative practices. There was this moment where we all connected with something, a plant or a mineral or an animal, and spoke with its voice, and it sounds... What blew me away about that sounds like one of the more hippie-ish things, you know, someone will probably do in a week. But I found it very moving because there are plants, in particular for me, that I have a very strong emotional connection to. And when people started talking, the framework they would use is, I am fox, I am small, I am sly, I like the Twilight, stuff like this. They started to sound like poetry, and started to sound like, what's that book, the Lost Words?
Oh yeah,
you know. This was not planned, but when people started to speak with the voices of nature, it sounded like poetry, and I was like, it's almost like poetry. If nature had a voice, it would speak like poetry, and it was really moving. For a few moments, everyone in that room was a poet. And engaging with the world in a non-rational, heart-centered, artistic, beautiful way. And I will say that everything we did was very empowering, very motivating. Some of it was very challenging, but it was also giving you tools to deal with that challenge. You know, and then the Constellation Therapy, like some heavy stuff came up, and we engaged in a Constellation Therapy with it. And I suppose we should probably explain. My understanding of Constellation Therapy is well, to describe what happened in the room, we were talking about a certain conflict between X and Y. One person represented X, one person represented Y, and different people were brought in to represent different facets of things, and you could move around and you could engage with each other. And, rather than sitting down and analysing, you're up and moving around in space, in relationship. And I found stuff could really shift there. So, just brilliant.
Yeah. Bart, do you want to say something about the Constellation space that you've been in, because what we were looking at was very much within the context of the eco-visioning workshop, whereas the tools themselves come from something you're...
Yeah, well, I haven't
well.
done the training, although I'm looking into it, so you might be better placed to say something about it, but I have been a participant in it. Anthony told me about the one you did, and it sounds like it. Yeah, topic is very different, but it sounds like the principles
same thing.
are the same.
Yeah.
And I've done family constellation work, and it's like magic a little bit, where you're just, especially if it's held. I've also met friends who've gone, and this is with everything, isn't it? Where people go to therapy for the first time and they go, oh, it wasn't for me because they had a bad experience, you know. Or I like the word psychic for me was something where I would always go, oh God, because there's so many charlatans. And then you have people like Breed O'Donoghue, where you're like, no, oh, okay, so this exists and this is 100% real. Yep. You know, and like you said, Anthony, it's always very practical. It's the people who are very practical. I'm already seeing a few themes about being heart-centered, how poetry is maybe more real than your shopping list in a way. But anyway, I'm drifting all over the place. But I suppose the way I would describe it is making a representation of a system. The way I've actually always done it was like with little fucking Lego people.
Indeed.
And then if you have a good facilitator or a good healer or whoever is doing that, who's holding it, they will focus on the part that maybe jumps out at them at that point. Mm-hmm. So I've done a family constellation where it might be, okay, let's look at your Bart's relation with grandfather, father, uncle, that kind of diamond. How is that? And then kind of projecting out from your own subconscious, I would say. I'm kind of looking at the doctor here to see if he agrees, but the professor, I should say. And that's really powerful because it allows the facilitator to step into the. Okay, so the way I've done it, the couple of times that I've done it, would be first you make a representation with figurines, for instance,
and one-to-one with the facilitator.
You would do that too. Yeah, yes, right. I've actually not done the. Because I know that can be very powerful as well. But when I went into it, the people who sent me on, they were like, this stuff, it might be a bit heavy and you might be more comfortable and able to go really deep if you do it one-on-one. But I know that the way you've done it is with
a group. Yeah,
we would say representanten in Dutch. What would you call it? Like stand-ins? No, what's the word?
Representatives?
Yeah, representatives, yeah. Mm-hmm. And but I suppose it kind of works the same way with the difference that... well, anyway, the way I've done it then, so you look at the representation and you focus in on it and you use placemats on the floor and you project the energy onto them. So like that placemat is the energy of granddad, that's the one of dad, that's the one of uncle, that's me. And then both the facilitator and you can step into those different spaces to see what the energy is like. Now, obviously that's different than having representatives there because they have their own... They can speak to it more. But even that, I already found so powerful because if you are, for instance, have a tricky relationship with someone and you're able to step into their field of energy or at least your projection onto them to feel the other side of a relationship, it is, again, it's not cognitive, it's very embodied. And you kind of, in my case, with some of the different stuff I've done, also gave me huge compassion for people who I might have been at odds with. Yeah. Because you're like, oh, that's what this feels like. Yeah. And that's what I feel like.
Yeah.
You know.
It's mad, isn't it?
That is mad, Cool. So what would you add to that, Féidhlim?
Well, in the group, because I've done it with chess pieces, with cushions, with whatever, both facilitating that and with a therapist myself. And it is very powerful. In the group, you're watching... as just magic unfolds where people come in and stand in and have the same gestures, the same turn of phrase as the parent or the cousin or the brother that they're representing, which is very, very cool. Just to watch that unfold.
And I think it's exactly the same in that because in the way that you would do it one-on-one, you see it in the facilitator. They step in. And it's so funny when someone steps into the energy of your grandmother, but they're like a 30-year-old man. Yeah. It doesn't matter. It's like there's an overlay of energy.
It's mad.
And you just see that person you know and love rather than the completely physically different person. But I haven't done it in with representatives, so I would be very interested, because I wonder as well, do you have to be mindful of making sure their own
stuff doesn't
come in too much?
Not really, because you find that very often the people that are selected they just share so much with the person they're representing. Yeah. Do you know? I can't think of examples just off the top of my head. Well, I know that when I've been selected as a representative, I've been selected as the sibling of somebody who has died, et cetera, et cetera. And so I look at my relationship with my sister who died when I was 4 years old, and that just, I was picked out of a room full of 12 people. I might have been the only one with a sibling that had passed away. Do you know? Yeah. And that was exactly what the representation called for at the time. And so there's that sense that we're, the perfect person will step in. If you have somebody sitting in the corner of the room with their arms crossed thinking there is no way I'm going to stand up on that floor, they'll be chosen for the person who has that attitude to the therapeutic process into life, you know. And that's just the way it is. And we're all, we all have everything within us anyway. Yeah. So it's difficult to go wrong with that attitude. Yeah. What I find kind of magic about the constellation space is you get together a group of 8, 10, 12 people, whatever it is, and everybody arrives in the morning. You don't know anybody. You're looking around. You might know the facilitator. You might know one other person. But we're all going to work together and represent one another's loved ones, parents, siblings, etc. But what I find magical about it is one by one, as people work, as you work with the facilitator and you watch your family being set up, it's like the mask that we've carefully brought with us and we carry around in the world just falls away. And what you see underneath is just this radiant beauty that comes through everybody. And just one by one, as the process unfolds. It's not like it all magically falls away when somebody clicks their fingers and says it's time to start. It's a process of unfolding that happens just like a wave around the room as people, begin to do the work 1 hour into the next hour. And I find that so heartening, that we're able to just step into that space and let go of those masks.
I love all this because it's so like love is more real in a way than what we have been told is real. Like, it's so funny the last couple of years for me, definitely the last 10 years or so, where it's just all that stuff is slowly falling to the wayside, where all these tight ideas of what reality is and don't be so saccharine about this, that, or the other. Or even what you just said there, Anthony, which is very poetic, that animals, you would speak in poetry. And it's like when we try to write a song or something, you wouldn't go super analytical. Like, we always want to go to that heart space, and that's not for nothing. And like in Constellation, I was just thinking when you were speaking there that it's funny that I love acting in the theatre as well, and that in a way there's some kind of connection, I suppose, with Constellation, where you're stepping in to a different energy but still bringing yourself. When Anthony was telling me about the Constellation you guys did, and I do know as well that constellations often are quite private, so I don't really want to go into that one. But a question that arose in me was when you're taking other things than just, this is my family, for instance, but if you take like the climate, for instance, if you would do a representation about the climate and one person, represents nature who is being abused, and I was wondering, after hearing Anthony's story, that's a lot to represent. That's a big, I don't know if that's a good example, but I can imagine you've done...
I think it's case specific. Yeah. So what you need in terms of a constellation is you need enough energy behind the question. So that's the thing. So if the climate comes up as being the biggest thing in the room, that's something that you can run with. And then it's very much being in service to the process rather than trying to figure out, well, what are we going to do? What are we going to set up? How are we going to do this? It's more, well, what's in the room? And so is there a pressing issue in one person or in several people? Is there something that's really biting at the moment? Because if if there's something that's really biting, there's enough energy to be able to work with it.
It's almost like you're bringing it into the light rather than just putting it on them.
Yeah, that's all.
No, but that makes 100% sense. But more my question, like if one person is
nature
and is being, well, God, I don't want to molest it, or I don't want to use a horrible word. Is that not a lot for that one person to carry energetically?
Not necessarily, because I was, for years, I had fears around the environment and around the state of the world. Yeah. And there was a constellation that I did at one point, and there were 2 people in the constellation, me and one other person. Yeah. The work was being done for me, but I was also sitting in the space of the constellation, which is unusual. But let me see, what the facilitator set up, I think, just the world. And so for me, that question is, what, like yours, what's the damage being done? What's the pain of that? Yeah. The world was fine. the world was there basically saying, no, you've got to breathe, you know? And it was just so powerful. Just sitting on the floor, bawling my eyes out, watching the world is actually okay. I can't get my head around the world being okay. And I'm getting to that. But at the time, that was probably 15 years ago, something like that. And even then, the world was fine. There was just this magnificence, you know, to that presence. And just sitting in that presence was humbling and awe-inspiring, and realizing that actually there isn't necessarily anything to do.
And isn't it mad that how difficult it would be to get to that place rationally?
Yeah.
Maybe impossible.
Because the spreadsheets are telling us that we're all
number
going
goes
down
up,
this
number
valley,
goes down.
You know?
Yeah.
The spreadsheets are mad, like, but you can't fit love into the spreadsheet.
No.
And if you don't fit love into the spreadsheet, your equation is going to be wrong, you know? So the metrics that we're using to measure the state of the world are essentially, they're only measuring the past.
Yeah.
They're not measuring the potentials. Yeah. They're not measuring the future. They're also not measuring the change in the human heart. Yeah. Do you know the capacity that we have to show up for one another and for the world generally? And so, I don't know, I'm really, really optimistic about the future, because I think that this stranglehold of rigid separation is beginning to fall away. And as that falls away, you know, everything is to play for. Yeah, you know, completely everything, because we have this, you know, the talk about the illusion of separation. What does that mean when you wake up in a rational mindset and it's grey outside? And you know, what does that actually mean? And I suppose for me, I work with water a lot and waterways and that kind of stuff. And if you look at the water cycle says the water evaporates from the oceans, it blows in over the land, it lands as rain, falls down through the rivers, back into the sea again. You've got a nice cycle. You know, that's cool. And if you look at that a step further, you can say, well, that's technically a half water cycle, that the full water cycle requires water to soak into the soil. And when it's good and ready, it comes up as a spring and then meanders back through the landscape. And that's all well and good as well, from a certain perspective. But if you look at the water cycle in any little bit more detail at all, what did you drink this morning? You know, whether it's tea or coffee, it's all water. Where did it come from? You know, okay, it came out of a tap. Cool. Where did that come from? It came from a reservoir. Oh, where did that come from? So we're drinking the landscape. You know, there isn't any separation between what goes on in the landscape and what I'm taking directly into my body. And you take that one step further again and you realize that I'm, 75% water by molecular weight? Now, water is a tiny molecule. So we're actually 99% water by molecular count. So I am water, looking at water. Do you know, that's all that's there almost. I mean, I know you go a step below that and it's all energy and an empty space and all that, but even just from the very tangible, practical thing that is water that comes out of our tap, you turn around then, you go to the loo, flush the toilet, where does that go to? We're stitched into the water cycle. You know, we are part of that process. And so even on that very, very physical and chemical and biological level, separation suddenly becomes an illusion. You know, there isn't anything that I can do in my landscape that doesn't influence the water that I'm drinking or the water that somebody else is drinking. And so from a practical point of view, getting that clean is obviously crucially important. But coming back to realizing the sacredness of water and making that sacrosanct, like the values that we hold don't support clean water because we don't hold water as sacred. And you spread that out to everything, to the soil, the food, the plants, the other species that live around us, the air, and it's all the same thing. It's just the water is the lens that I tend to work with.
It must be particularly because I actually love everything you're saying, and I don't want to drag it down to the negative because I do think we've been on that diet of a prayer for disaster too much. But it is jumping out to me for someone who moved to Lahinch that locally we have a lot of water problems.
Yes.
Like there was the river in Ennistimon that was poisoned, and quite often you
although
can't.
apparently the fish are coming back faster than expected. Somebody was telling me that recently.
Well, and I've heard this a lot as well, that if they're, when you were saying about the earth is, everything is fine, and it was beautiful because I could see in your eyes as well, like it's such an emotionally held thing, which then I don't have to, I think we've come to this a lot, me and Anthony together, it's like, I don't have to check any fact sheet because I can feel the truth in you.
Yeah.
Done. But still, on that smaller minded level, it is mad that you are, well, and maybe you are called as well. Maybe you are bringing this beautiful vision to an area where there's the issue in the river. There's all the problems with people swimming and getting sick because there's so much wastewater there. Now we had 2 weeks ago the mad tank that burst in Ennistimon, and there was a mad smell, and nobody's telling us what it actually was, like there's, so is there something, to frame it more positively, do you think there might be something to that narrative that you're called to live in an area that might need it?
Do you know what? It's very difficult to live in an area without dirty water in Ireland.
In general?
Well, it's certainly in Ireland. Yeah. There's some European cities where you can swim in the river, but but
most civilization is always dirty.
You bring in a flush toilet and it's downhill from there, literally downhill from there. But I'm not sure. I certainly don't think that's the reason why we moved to Lahinch. I think we moved to Lahinch because we're drawn to the area. All of the houses that we've looked at in the area have been in and around quite a small pocket. Which is cool. But
that's only a small part of it, maybe.
I don't know that it's for any grand service.
No, okay, but I mean, but it must be particularly galling to have, like, because I agree with you, like civilization is always dirty, but where I'm from in Holland, you would have at least.
It doesn't need to be.
No, 100%. But it has. Okay, you're right. Thank you for picking me up on that. So historically, recently, it has been.
Certainly.
But like, for instance, in the Netherlands, you could have the illusion of it anyway, of it being clean. There's a lot of attention being paid to how the wetlands are dealt with, how the drinking water is dealt with. People can't just throw their waste in, but I do, like, here it's been much more present for me than anywhere else I've lived. That's what I will say.
But I think that's because people here are closer to the land. Like,
that could be true as well.
Yeah, I wonder. I don't know. I think. I suspect that in the Netherlands, the reason why the attitude to water is more careful is because more damage has been done there for longer. Yeah. And so there's more of a realization of what's being lost or what's potentially being lost, in the past or the present. Whereas here, the cleaner something is, the less we're likely to try to protect it, if you see what I mean. And I think that there's a number of issues. One is the Ballymacraven River, which was poisoned, by, I think, sludge is what I understand, from the Irish drinking water treatment facility, which is pretty ironic. The irony of that. And then when I looked into that very, very briefly, there's been one fairly significant fish kill per year as a result of water treatment processes, whether it's chlorine or sludges or whatever. And that's just kind of insane,
That seems preventable.
It does seem preventable. It does. It really does, exactly. And then on the other side, there's a number of different factors. One is you've got sewage going in from Lahinch and from Ennistimon, and I don't even know what degree of treatment that has. But I just want to look at treatment for a second. If the sewage treatment system in Ennis, for example, is 95% efficient. That sounds like a good figure. But if you've got 10,000 people, that's 500 toilets that are flushing into the River Fergus, essentially. Yeah. And that's what 95% of 10,000 people means. Yeah. And that doesn't sound so hot. So in Ennistimon and Lahinch, we've got the sewage effluent going in to a greater or lesser degree, but you've also got something called a storm surge diverter. I don't know if that's what the recent incident was about. I hadn't heard about that. Yeah. But the storm surge diverter basically takes both foul sewage from toilets and houses and the street runoff from the older parts of town. So the newer housing estates all have separate sewers for toilets and for street water, but the older ones don't, all around the country, wherever you've got flush toilet infrastructure all around the world. And they go down to the sewage treatment system if you get a heavy downpour. To prevent your sewage treatment system from being completely flushed through, you have a unit called a storm surge diverter box just before that unit. And what that does, its job is to act as a brake. Okay. And so it slows down the flow of water entering the sewage treatment system. And after prolonged heavy rainfall, that fills. And its next bypass is straight into the river. So what I've heard for Ennistimon is that after half an hour of heavy rainfall, you see the contents of the toilets of Ennistimon floating down towards the surfers in Lahinch. And that's the figure that's there. So that's where you get beach closures after heavy rain, in peak season, when you've got lots of visitors, lots of water use, plus you've got the heavy rainfall. And that's the issue. But the challenge isn't so much, there's no inevitability to any of that. Yeah. Because it would be really easy to simply say, okay, well, we choose to do something different. We choose to put the financial resources into building decent filtration. And like in Kilchima, in County Mayo, where they've got a big constructed wetland which takes the treated sewage and treats it further. It takes the storm water that lands on the streets any day of the week and treats that. And it also takes all of the storm surge diversion. And that gets routed straight into the wetland. So by the time it gets to the far end, it's much, much cleaner than it would be otherwise. And it's very, very easy to do. Like, it's not a lot of money to roll that kind of thing out. And it just comes straight back to values.
Absolutely.
And those are changing.
Yeah. I mean, what was coming through for me, Féidhlim, is this idea of relationship. So again, coming from a Chinese medicine perspective, we're not separate from our environment, So if our environment is ill, of course we're going to be ill. Because like you said, the water that comes out of your tap does not come out of your tap. Yeah. It is involved in it's involved in the oceans and the rainfall and the mountains and the marshes and the rivers. All of those, that landscape, you were drinking that when you were drinking a glass of water. And coming back to what you said at the start, you were like what you said was you loved the silence, the quietness around where you're living at the moment that allows you to be in relationship with the land. That when you're in cities, there is noise, there is electromagnetic noise, there is psychic noise, there is actual aural noise, And when all that noise is happening, of course you're going to think the water comes out of the tap and it's fine until it stops and it's just somebody else's problem. And I'm sure somebody else is taking care of it. And what I'm asking is, Féidhlim, is if your world is that noisy, like, how do you reconnect with it? How do you reconnect with the water cycle or with nature when everything around you is so noisy? Also
because you were in Ennis for a good long time.
Big block. Yeah. The way I connected in Ennis was through making community orchards with groups. We have about 5 community orchards around Ennis, 5 or 6 of them. And so literally getting feet on the ground, spades in the soil, digging holes, planting trees, putting in compost and mulch that people had brought. And so there's quite a number of those there, still growing and happy, which is very cool. And that's one, connected with people. Swimming in Ballyala was great. Just electrically earthing as well, whether that's in Ballyala or whether it's bare feet on the grass, either. So those are all ways, and I'm sure people connect with themselves, because that's probably all we're doing anyway. People connect with themselves in many different ways. So for some people, cities and towns and urban spaces might be really invigorating and might be a really good way to be present. And they might be driven nuts out where we are at the moment because there isn't that social connection. So for me, I really enjoy being out in the space. But there's lots and lots of different people, all having lots of different experiences, all needing different things, which is cool because if everybody needed to live like I do, the world would be a really boring place.
You've said something that's really made me aware of not a prejudice, but a deep-rooted idea I had, which is that, cities are disconnected and unnatural. And you're right, there are people that thrive in cities. Because one of my main teacher, doctor called Féidhlim Harty, who's I think he's the greatest healer I've ever met, and he's incredibly wise, and he's incredibly, because he's, treats from a Chinese philosophical perspective. He's connected with nature and the cycles of heaven and the cycles of earth, and he gives talks on the Bagua, the trigrams, marsh, thunder, mountain, and how these different forces manifest in our body. So he's a man that's intimately acquainted with the natural world. And when I met him a few years ago, he'd just come back from Switzerland. He'd given a talk there, and they were like, as a present, as a bit of a holiday, we're going to send you to this beautiful village up in the Swiss Alps for a week, just so you could relax. And he's like, yeah. So they sent me up there, this beautiful village. And he's like, you live in the countryside, right? I was like, yeah, I grew up in the countryside. He's like, what the hell do you do? What do you do? Because he's a city boy. He grew up in Hangzhou, a city of 8 million people. Like, for all his connection with the natural world and his understanding of it, he was just in this town, in this village up in the Alps in Switzerland, losing his mind with boredom. The silence driving him nuts.
So it's gas, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, well, and as a student as well. Oh, sorry, what were you saying?
Just horses for courses.
Yeah, exactly. But it's also like when I was like a student in my early 20s, I loved being in city centre, in Galway or in Nijmegen or wherever you like. It's and even here now, I'm glad there's so much hustle and bustle, because there is. Like, we live in a rural area, but there's loads going on. So you can go where I live in the Burren and it'd be quiet. But then if I'm a bit bored, I can go into Ennistimon or into Lahinch or whatever, Corfin. But yes, I've completely railroaded myself.
To go back a little bit, one of the things I loved about the eco-visioning workshop, the connecting with the animals and plants and with the constellation work, is that it also brought up solutions in the moment that I don't think any amount of brainstorming or research could ever, come up, like ways of connecting, ways of feeling about things. And you talked about this quantum Newtonian split, which I absolutely love, that we are still living in a Newtonian world, a world of spreadsheets and number goes up, number goes down kind of thing. But what quantum physics teaches us, and this is not an abstraction, is that there is an ambiguity, and there is an ambiguity you can harness, and it is not a flaw, it is not a shortcoming, it's actually fundamental, the ability to hold two ideas simultaneously. People often talk about Schrodinger's cat, the cat in the box, is it alive or dead? And it's not, is it alive or dead? It is both alive and dead until you open the box, And exploring that ambiguity, being able to sit in those places where, like, the world is on fire and it's beautiful,
because that's actually a really good point. That when I was in that constellation space and looking at the world, and the world was fine, and the world was busy instructing me to breathe because I obviously wasn't. That's not to say that fire isn't happening. It's just that that's not where I need to put my attention. So it is, so that's an important just follow-up thread to that. What I find about the quantum physics side of things is that it's, the Newtonian world has been gone since the 1920s, essentially, superseded. And essentially in the Newtonian universe, whoever has the most force will win. And, if you look around, if the enemy of your peace of mind is the military, industrial, whatever else complex that's there, then it's very difficult to have peace of mind, because they will always have more power than I do. And so it's very difficult to know, well, how do you change that? Because we're just the little guy. Whereas in the Newtonian world, that's no longer at issue. Excuse me, it's no longer true, for a start.
In the quantum world.
In the quantum, in the quantum world.
Yes.
That's no longer true. It's actually no longer the case. An analogy, if you want to hold that, is maybe whoever holds the most stillness the most clearly dictates how the future will unfold. And I can't tie that back to any particular quantum physics analogy, but there are so many analogies that come to us from quantum physics that we can begin to use and harness and move forward. And I think what I find more and more exciting is that the reality of that space, it's not just the analogies. The reality of that space is such that, yes, there's something that's very, very real and tangible in this, that the potency of the observer is hugely significant, that it's not just about, I'm running out of words. Just that. Well,
it's not a Newtonian universe. It's not a clockwork universe. There is, and the other thing about Newtonian universes is that they tend towards decay, right? Second law of thermodynamics. Everything's in decline all the time.
Which disregards life.
Yes.
Which works in the opposite direction.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If
I could
anything,
never get my head around the decay thing. People would say it, and I was thinking, well, why is that a problem?
Yeah, there's no such thing as a perpetual motion machine. You're like, well, we're kind of living in a perpetual motion.
Ever heard of DNA?
Yeah. And even things like, gravity, because before Einstein, everything was all about forces, right? There are forces acting on matter. Yeah. Matter generates a force, and that force links different periods of matter. But gravity tells us that gravity is not a force. Gravity is the bending of space-time. Like, how wild is that? The reason the moon orbits the Earth, the reason the moon doesn't fly off into the universe in a straight line...
Because of gravity.
But the moon is moving in a straight line.
Yeah.
But the Earth is bending space around it. So as the moon moves in a straight line through curved space, it orbits the Earth. So as we walk through the universe, we are warping it around us, which is just the maddest thing,
I can't get my head around it at all. I think that not understanding quantum physics puts me in pretty good company.
Yeah.
And most of the quantum physicists that I've ever read about, if you can understand it, you're lying or delusional.
Your head is not the issue either. Yeah. Like I can feel into quantum physics. Like I have a heart-centered approach.
Exactly.
Which much easier. Yeah. I want to come back to this idea of the prayer of disaster. I think that's such a good line, because I love, like, a wonderful a Chinese medicine practitioner I go to in the Netherlands, Wout Notenboom. He would always say to me, like, if you're trying to go, well, let's sub in some Irish town names, but say if you're constantly trying not to go to Dublin, you're going to end up in Dublin. Whereas if you just go, I'm going to go to Galway, that's fine. And I think that's kind of what you're saying, is about where are you putting the energy and the direction. I recently was kind of interfacing with one of the big catastrophes and watching news about it and all that stuff. And I was useless for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
I wasn't a nice dad. I wasn't present. I wasn't still. I was trying to be kind, but I was so stressed out of my mind. But what is this thing? Because even when you say prayer, it's nearly a kind of a religious kind of, it does have a religious feeling. And I don't even mean religious at the purest spiritual sense, but more a churchy sense of, like, you hear a lot of people, it's nearly as if they feel it's their obligation to worry about climate change all the time and be so distraught by it, and we can't look away. But it doesn't seem to give positive direction, where then sometimes you will see an entrepreneur who's just like, yeah, I found this great idea to get loads of plastic out of the oceans. Are we going to do that?
Let's just do it.
And people are like, you're not, that's not heavy enough. You're just trying to solve the problem,
Exactly.
Bastard. Yeah. There's no martyrdom in solving the problem.
Indeed.
But it's nearly... Yeah, it feels kind of churchy to me.
Yeah, interesting.
I wonder if that's part of it, if it's some kind of... Yeah.
You'd wonder, because surely it's more than just bad people controlling us.
Yes.
There must be
we are controlling ourselves
But there must be a deeper cultural element to it as well, which is where you come to with the religious side of things. Yeah. It's not just some big bad media wanting to manipulate us. Sure, that might be there. Grand, fine, But why does that make us so easily manipulatable? And that religious thing, that, almost wanting to believe in original sin, which I could never get my head around. But anyway, that idea is very much stitched into the whole narrative. It's interesting, Do you know the Crying Indian ad from the 1970s in the US? You know, paid for by the plastics industry in order to put the blame on the general public for placing in the environment the products of the plastic industry.
Yeah.
You know, and it was one of the first ads that really began to shift the focus of attention onto the individual consumer, for want of a much, much better word. And so since then, there's been a fairly carefully laid out story that we are the problem.
Yeah.
Bullshit. Do you know, we're
that's always struck me as so odd.
We're phenomenal. Do you know, you look around at humanity and it's just achieved so much beauty in so many different ways. And now there's, 8 billion of us, pretty much? Something. That's a lot of solutions. Just sitting there waiting to come through.
Yeah.
You know, and so we're not the issue, we're not the problem. We're the ones that can reach into the ether, if you like, and pull back the ideas that need to be brought into focus. I think just the pace of change at the moment is just so quick. You know, it's just quite phenomenal. And what you say about climate change, one of the things that has me feeling better about the world now than I did 5, 6, 7 years ago is that as I look at climate change, if I look at the symptoms that we call climate change, you have flooding. You have droughts, you have wildfires. You know, there's other things that we can look at in a minute. But basically, if I dig a pond in a drain on a farm, from that point down, the drain basically reckons that climate change has been sorted because the flooding has stopped and the droughts have stopped. Do you know? Because I'm holding on to the water in the pond. It's soaking into the soil. It's recharging the groundwater. It's coming up as a spring again, rather than swooshing it away as quickly as possible into the nearest river or stream, which then floods further down, etc., etc. If you put in lots of them in your local area, in your local catchment, you deal with the flooding issues in your local towns and villages. You know, that was climate change. That was the problem. And that was something that we had no control over because Big Oil was pulling all the strings and not playing ball when we were trying to shut them down. Do you know, where we had no control, whereas now we can do something really tangible, really practical that sequesters carbon while you're at it, supports wildlife, supports the hydrodynamic, basically deals with all of the things that you would want to deal with if you were dealing with climate change. And so that's your floods, your droughts. Wildfires are partly a function of water tables. If you drop your water tables year on year to irrigate almonds and avocados in California, you know, then eventually you're going to get down beyond the reach of the tree roots. As soon as you do that, I mean, it becomes completely self-evident that you're going to create a tinder dry canopy. And so, again, you're just looking at a water management issue. You know, why is the groundwater privatized? Why are big companies allowed to ride roughshod over the public good in those areas? You know, why are we dipping that down and farming in a way that strips down the groundwater? I've heard the analogy, you know, to put on a nice moisturizer on your skin, you just get a syringe and pull out some blood and spread it on your skin. You know, it doesn't seem to be a terribly effective way to irrigate the ground by artificially drawing water up from the soil. And so you can extend that even to, say, the Amazon basin, which is drying out at the moment. It's tragic. It's, you know, you look at it and you say, isn't climate change terrible? But that ignores the fact that one of the reasons why it's drying out is that we've removed the tree cover between the Atlantic and the continental interior. You know, we've removed that block of trees where you're close to ports, close to the farmland, or it's farmland because it's close to ports. You clear the forest, you plant soya meal to export to Irish farmers who are already fairly well generously supplied with good grass. You know, and the cows aren't meant to eat soya meal, they're meant to eat grass anyway. And as we do that, what we've done is we've broken the biotic pump that the trees act as. So when the moisture vapor comes in from the Atlantic and lands on the soil, it flows off really quickly again. Because it's flowing off over dry, parched soil, rather than landing on the soil, soaking into the roots, being evaporated up from the leaves into the air, and it's moving in and being pumped steadily into the continental interior. So no amount of haggling over carbon budgets is actually going to fix the pump. But fixing the pump becomes actually really straightforward. You get somebody like Ecosia with a lot of money and a lot of resources to, you know, just route those resources into planting in the right place. And so, you know, the right tree, right place. If you look at the world generally through the climate and land management lens, it gives you, very, very quickly, it gives you a clue, an idea as to where to focus your attention and your efforts, and to begin to rebuild the pumps that we have around the place in order to get those green rivers that flow through the air, to get those flowing once more. And I think that as I look at the physical land management choices that we can make, carbon-based climate change ceases to hold the same thrall. It ceases to be a problem because, big business, the oil industry, the governments, they're all going to do that thing anyway.
Yeah.
And as they change, they'll do that thing less and less, and they'll shift gear to something much better. But I'm not going to break my head trying to figure out how to get them to change, because I'm not the one making the decisions in those companies. I'm going to trust that the universe will inspire them in due course to do what they need to do. And that's no longer any of my business. My business is to deal with the thing that I can do, which is working with local communities, working with waterway repair, working with suds units and rain gardens and farm ponds and, all of that kind of thing, where we can rebuild the natural habitat-based hydrology within the Irish landscape, which is where I happen to be, and to do that work in front of me. And that just really, for me, it's just taken so much of the fear of the future out of the process,
Love it. And it's like it's a local solution, because I do think that a lot of us suffer, and I have this to an extent as well, where you just go look at these big problems and go, oh my God, and the evil and the blah, blah, blah. But actually local solutions create change. They really do. And they make, when people are, like, one of the things with, like, my view of government is as low as you can go, kind of. But what I have found...
Spoken like a true political science graduate.
Oh, it's so funny when a few of my friends are that way inclined, even ones I didn't meet doing that particular, in that particular college, and everyone is just completely like, yeah, we've seen what it's like and we've had enough, thank you. But what I sometimes find hopeful in Ireland anyway is that there does seem to be a response to when people are just like, no, we're really not doing that, guys, and they're kind of like, oh, okay, well, to try something else, and that starts with people being more informed about what's going on and the solutions. And this whole notion, it always makes me so just untrusting when their solution is always curb your freedom. And it's always, no, you need to have less freedom and then it'll be somehow fine, even when you do the maths and when you do it from that side, it doesn't add up.
Yeah.
So I love what you're speaking to, which is just clear solutions. And if it works here locally, then that can be exported.
Yes, exactly.
And I mean, it's the same like when we were talking about the Dutch water management, especially with dikes and stuff. I'm not saying that that's all perfect, but they bring Dutch engineers in everywhere, like China and everywhere, to go, hey, okay, this is a way we can do it. Like the town where we were living in Nijmegen, it's a big river, the Waal, and they would just see there's so much more water and more water coming into it. So they just made a whole new arm of the river, created a beautiful island.
Yeah, lovely.
And it looks great. And there's people like doing all sorts of sports on it, and it looks really nice. And it can now hold so much more. And they need it as well. Like, it's still coming up, like, but those solutions are exportable rather, than. And then in my case, because you do always have to look at yourself, I think where I need to stop is, being all about, authoritarianism and kind of, no, just be here and do what you can do here now.
Yeah. Unless you want to go on a complete bender,
Yeah, that's probably not good for anyone.
Engage in the addiction full on. And
but it is an addiction, thank you. It is an addiction.
Just feel really awful for an afternoon. And then
think that is somehow virtuous, but that's the prayer thing I'm coming to. It's like it's virtue by suffering.
Yeah.
But I do have that, 100%. I will put my hand.
Yeah.
But it also paralyzes you.
100%.
The thing is, the people that don't care are going to be more motivated than the people that are paralyzed by caring. But I do think you can't discount caring or sensitivity either. To go back to the fish kill, when I think it was sludge was released by Irish Water and killed tremendous amount of the fish in the River Ina.
Oh yeah.
The way I met you at this actually, Phil, but there was people would not shut up about it. People would not be quiet about it. Everyone was like, no, it's fine. It's just a routine kind of. We need to know what happened, and in the end there was like a token fine. I think they were fined $2,000 or something like that. It was fucking
God.
But
who was fined? I mean, we were fined.
Yeah, I know, Irish. The taxpayer. Yeah. But what I thought was beautiful was like people really got behind this issue.
Yeah.
But they also did something. There was a wake for the fish.
Yeah.
And I took a few photos at it. And I remember standing there and people had developed a grassroots iconography. It was not everyone, but a lot of people were doing something that was based on a fish skeleton. I think you had a T-shirt that had a bit of a fish bone motif on it. I took a photo of you, which is why I remember. But other people had gotten like jackets and duct tape and made this thing that looked like a fish head and the spine and the ribs, and this like the iconography of a dead fish, and got together and sang songs and burned candles in the middle of Ennistimon. And I was like, this is doing something. Yeah. Like, this is doing something. This is not us
100%.
numbing ourselves.
That is much more real than a lot of other stuff. Yeah.
So it's not numbing ourselves, and it's not denying it. It's like, here we have a ritual for this. We have a wake.
It's also not obsessing. Forward. It's like we have a procedural, and not even, that sounds stupid, but it's like we know which steps we're going to go through to heal some of this pain, and we're going to stand for the land, and we're not going to accept the story that it's just some, sorry guys, blah, blah. No. You're lying.
Yeah.
We will hold this grief and then we'll go on.
Yeah.
And I think that was perfect in a way. It was
amazing.
Yeah.
And the upbeat view that I'm giving expression to here, I mean, I'm perfectly well able to go on a Instagram
but I love it.
as well.
But I love it.
And just sink into that negative space and then come out of it again and think, okay, well,
there was no use.
It was no use. But I'm not saying that there isn't a load of work to be done. Mm-hmm. It's more that the inevitability of doom, is gone. Let me see. There's a phrase somewhere in the back of my mind. It's gone. It's gone. It's just completely gone. But there's that sense that there's suddenly the possibility that going forward, if we engage constructively and appropriately and lovingly, we'll be able to bring about the world that we want. Mm. Rather than constantly battling against this thing that's just completely insurmountable. And so, as you say, with the wake, it's sparked a whole amount of local inputs. There's been a lot of tree planting. There's a lot more look at Clean Lakein, which is the group of us that are looking at the White River itself, or the lake itself. So there's a lot that's been going on that's been really, really practical. And I'm not for a second saying that if the world, Gaia, stands there in the constellation space and says, I'm fine, you need to breathe. I'm not saying that there isn't work to do. Yeah. There is a load of work on cleanup.
But isn't it funny that we're obsessed with, or we're told to be obsessed with metrics like carbon? Mm-hmm. How do you measure the impact of a fish wake?
Yeah.
I remember asking a doctor about this. It was like talking about the pandemic, which must not be named, but in Taiwan, they had a lot of herbal medicines for treating it. And I was interviewing people that were doing research into they knew they were effective, but they were researching how they were effective and to the level to which they were effective. And I was like, it wasn't actually me that asked this question. I would never ask it, but somebody else in the room asked one of the researchers. She was like, so would you say this boosts the immune system? And she just threw her hands up. She's like, what's the immune system? Like, what is it? She's like, there's an infinite number of ways to benchmark the immune system. Depending on the benchmark you use, yes, it does. No, it doesn't. Or we don't know. Yeah. So we have these concepts like immune system and so on. And then you're like, okay, well, how do we measure it? And it was like, okay, we'll measure leukocytes. Today, the immune system is leukocytes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Or tomorrow, the immune system could be a population-based approach or it could be fever, or it could be like... And I think the same thing kind of happens with environment, where we've kind of, people are picking things that are very measurable, like sea level or carbon. And it's not that those things don't exist, but because they are easier to measure, they gain maybe a disproportionate amount of attention. Yeah. Whereas things that are more difficult to measure.
Even measurement. It's very, very easy to measure the species that appear in a new pond. Because the aquatic species that are there now were not there before you dug the pond.
Yeah.
You know, that's a very, very easy measurement. And the fact that it's only one pond on one farm in one county in the country, that's kind of not terribly relevant. You can roll that out across the country. It's an easy metric.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't necessarily lend itself to sound bites.
Sure.
And so you're narrowing your scope for communication all the time as you look at, you know, trying to get it to fit into a tweet or a social media post of any sort, or, you know, whatever, or the media. Mm-hmm. So how do we begin to recreate the direct relationships with the land? And the fish wake, as you say, is a really, really effective way to do that on a local level. You know, if you can say, I care about what's here, sure, there is a lot more going on in the world, you know, that I don't want to look at. I choose not to look at. When it meets my awareness, I can send a prayer, I can send healing, love, whatever it is, but I'm not there, I'm here. Mm-hmm. So can I create the conditions here whereby we don't need to support the oil industry? Israel probably wouldn't exist if it wasn't for oil in the Middle East, I'd guess. Mm-hmm. Do you know? Yep. So if I create the conditions whereby oil is unnecessary, then does the situation in the Middle East shift and change and improve? Yeah. I don't know what shape that would take, but I do know that I happen to be here. Here is where I can focus my attention. And what I found in the past was that if I open my gaze too wide, like you say, I might be a crap dad for the afternoon after that. If I open my gaze too wide, I can't do anything. Yeah. Whereas if I can narrow right down, I can do the thing that's in front of me. Mm-hmm. Do you know? And I find it easy enough to get distracted from that. Yeah. But by opening a wide gaze, I'm just not able to cope. Do you know? Mm-hmm.
100%, but I keep coming back to how interesting. I'm just becoming aware of this as we're speaking, that I can feel my body that everything you're saying is true. And also, you don't need to worry about that. I think it's quite clear that you're not saying inaction or, you know, not at all, but you're given another, it's also like, when the sound on one side is very loud, you sometimes have to speak up for you know. But it's I'm coming back to this thing where it's so interesting that I feel in my body that the local solution is a better answer, but still there's all this guilt, man. And then you said something very apt there, Anthony, about they would probably love that. You said something like, if we're paralyzed, then the power is that you can just go, oh, that's working, great. You know, and I was listening yesterday to a podcast with a Dutch reincarnation therapist called Martha Overseer, very interesting guy. We need to get him on. I don't know. I have a sense it might happen. We'll get him all the way.
Plant that seed, Bart.
Yeah, I'm saying it like I'm saying it here, but he'd be great. But but he was saying, and because I think you were talking, there's so many little threads that I'm seeing. You were saying something there as well, Féidhlim, about like you won't be engaging with that stuff. It will kind of bounce off you if you're not already in some sort of a state. And that's what his point was as well, is like, you know, start a war, start a trauma, and then people will be susceptible to your, you know, religion or your thought process or your... And I think that's definitely the reason that we're all drawn into this. There must be something... To keep it to me, like there must be something in me that I have this guilt about looking away, in inverted commas, even though I think it's actually looking towards, like you're saying, it's looking towards where I live. But there's, we all carry a lot of baggage and little hooks that people can.
Yeah, I know Bert Hellinger, who developed the family constellation work, or who took the family constellation work from the Zulus, I think.
I think so, yeah.
So what he was looking at was a question, why do good people do bad things? And so there's within any culture, within any family, we have really strong rules. And if we go outside of those rules, we feel guilty. Yeah. So we don't necessarily feel guilty for doing terrible things within the context of the rules in the culture that we're in. What we feel guilty for is for doing the thing that's counter to the rules. Yeah. And so in the current culture, if there's a constant message, feel afraid, feel guilty, you know, be responsible for things that are completely outside of your control. If that's the constant message, by taking your attention away from those things and focusing on your vegetable garden which nobody else will ever notice, but which will reduce your carbon footprint and your food miles and the wear and tear on the planet.
And will make you a different neighbour and a different parent and a different friend.
For example, if you do that, you're not following the cultural rule of being afraid and being guilty and being preoccupied by what's going on in the wider world. And so that's just one element, one way to tie in with what you were saying. There's a couple of things that have come up when I have not been busy writing it down at all. You mentioned the recovery rate of the fish in the Ballymacraven River. One of the things that I've been interested in, another strand similar to climate change and how we can change that on a local landscape level. The other one is rewilding. And it's not, I work a lot with farming groups and that kind of stuff. And rewilding is one of those words that gets a bad rap in certain circles, but I find it really invigorating. I find it really exciting. One of the things that I find exciting is to see the recovery rates, just the phenomenal bounce back rates, whether it's fish life, whether it's insect life, whatever it is, that if you create space for wildlife and if you set up the infrastructure within that space, either by bringing back in apex predators or species or whatever it is, or trees or, whatever the species that the landscape needs is, or by introducing human interventions that replicate those roles, the bounce back rates for nature can just be through the roof. And there's no reason why that couldn't be combined with food growing and fibre growing and fuel wood and building materials and all that as well. I don't see any reason why people cannot benefit from the recreated abundance of nature spaces. But it's mostly in the context of people not being in there. But I find it really, really heartening as I watch that bounce back and that potential for bounce back. I think there's something like, if you create 2% marine protected zones, fish stock recovery rates can be about 15%. Like, that's a fairly cool return on investment.
It's amazing.
So many exponentials in nature.
Yeah, that's it, exactly. And if you say, okay, well, exponentials are the rule. That's the norm.
Yeah.
Let's start going in the right direction then.
Exactly. And it is very heartening. Like, we have an acre of land at the back of our house, and I had no idea how to deal with this properly.
Cool.
And we wanted to kind of cut the lawn. So last year I kept it pretty tight, and then I just, in my body, felt like, this isn't great. Like, I don't want it to be completely wild because I still want to be able to do something with it, and we have some raised beds and stuff. But now I've just kept like a big border of flowers, and it's a hive of activity.
Yeah, amazing.
And then we combined it with having Anthony's wedding ceremony there. So there was a lot of energy in the land. It's quite a happy field at the moment, and it can do a lot more because I'm quite ignorant. So it can have a lot more. But even those small steps, I was just there. There's so many bees and flowers and stuff. I'm like, cool. Yeah. Nature
cool.
knows how to do this stuff quite well if we don't.
It's been around for a while.
Yeah. We might even be part of it.
That's it, exactly.
But I think those rules are such a good point as well, because like a family has a rule, and it's often an unwritten rule that you only become aware of when you transgress it.
Or get married.
The three men go silent.
Yeah, leave it there, Philip. But it's the same. But it's the same for societies and for countries. And that's one of the. Someone pointed this out to me yesterday. That one of the valuable things about moving country, for instance, is that you can have a different view of the new land you're coming in, because it has things that the other one didn't, and doesn't have things that the other one did, and vice versa.
Completely.
So it's quite. It teaches you a lot. Yeah,
and I'll proviso the marriage thing. You've got two families coming together with two very different sets of rules, inevitably. Yeah. And so trying to find ways to negotiate.
And then you also often bring in some of the shadow of the other family, because that's someone that you recognize. Yeah. So I think
the things that look familiar when you first.
Yeah, I think if you have if you find a good partner, there will be. I'm not sure if this is right. I haven't thought about this enough. But there is there is the origin part of the original problem will be in them, but also there will be redemption of that problem if you find it. I think there's something with people we're attracted to, that they have the redemption, but also some of the shadow. Yeah.
Makes sense. There's a permaculture principle. The problem is the solution. Yeah. So that both are in there.
The salve is in the wound.
Yeah.
We let the grass grow wild around here, and the amount of bees and bugs and bats and birds and stuff that came back is amazing, And we have all this Sitka spruce back here. And this is kind of Katie's thing at the moment. Sitka spruce gets such a terrible rap,
Yeah.
Sitka spruce is non-native, which is a weird...
Yeah. I always find that an interesting one as well.
It is, it's not indigenous, kill it. And it's going to be cut down very soon, any day now. And people are like, oh, it's all dead in there, and you're like, it isn't. Like, you go in there and it's, it's a weird landscape. It's a slightly artificial landscape, but like, it's not separate from nature. There are mushrooms and there are critters and and I'm sure there are happier ways you can deal with that kind of land and stuff. But I think it shows something about our modern mindset as well, where you can hate a plant, you can just hate Sitka spruce. I remember talking to somebody who was at a talk once and she was like, when I see cherry laurel now, I attack it on sight. I was down the glen ripping it out of the soil, And I'm not saying that person's wrong, but I'm saying there is something strange in us where we can be like, that's the problem. Kill it all, Like, part of me is thinking, if the plant is successful here, it has a certain right to be here. Like, again, I believe in custodianship, and, and we should, like, I think we need to be in dialogue with nature, and let's not let anything get too out of hand. But, like, if the plant is surviving in here, then it's a bit weird to say, no, you don't belong.
Yeah, indeed. It's a funny one, isn't it? I have that with sycamore. I love sycamore trees. Yeah. They're great for climbing. As a child, I just climbed in sycamore trees all the time. They're just amazing.
Yeah.
The elm got hammered. The ash has got hammered. The hawthorn has been looking at something similar at the moment with fire blight. At what point do we open the doors and say, okay, well, we need other, trees to fill the gaps? And so it's just a funny one because there are people who really, really dislike sycamore for some reason.
Yeah.
Like it was native to Britain, even if it wasn't native to here.
Well, somebody described sycamore and oak and I can't remember some other hardwood. They were like, they're the British trees. They're the Brit trees,
gosh.
Because they were because our native trees, I think, would be more like hazel and rowan and stuff like that, which would not be as good for making ships and furniture. And it's like, the British wanted to build their navy and they wanted to, build furniture for their houses and castles and stuff. So like those big grand trees, someone's like, those aren't indigenous Irish trees. Those are.
The oak is. We just ship them off around the world as boats in the Navy.
I'm not saying I agree with them, but it's interesting that he had the perspective that was like, those are completely colonizer trees. Yeah. Our trees are the small, wirier trees. And I have a lovely, there's a book here called On Listening to Trees. It's a photo book of trees. And there's an essay at the start, which I think I've quoted before, but talking about has human beings traveled as they migrated east across Europe, they brought trees with them. They brought trees with them for food and for shelter and for acacia trees for delineating like boundaries and so on. And this guy is saying that rather than a return to quote unquote native or indigenous trees, we should be looking, because of climate change and because our world is changing, what are the trees that would be successful in our countries now and into the future rather than the ones that were here 400 years ago?
Yeah,
it's funny because there's a few things coming up in me. First of all, I was beneath the sycamore tree yesterday, just enjoying it, waving in the wind,
seething with rage.
Yeah, seething with rage. No, I love that sound when it's just the leaves are kind of flapping, and it's. Then I was thinking like the non-native thing is another metric thing. It's like when are you starting history that it was native, and then I was kind of like giggling to myself that tree racism. I'm a bit like those people who are like, I'm colorblind. It's like, just because I've no fucking clue what all these trees are called. I'm so ignorant that it's a virtue. I know hawthorn and blackthorn and the sycamore, and that's probably about it. It's just pure ignorance. My ignorance makes me virtuous. What did you write down there, Finn?
I wrote what works. Because cherry laurel thrives in Ireland. Rhododendron thrives in our peatland soils, but doesn't work. And what's the question? If it does, how do we define what works?
Yes.
It doesn't provide an economic return, which, is the metric that's been applied to most things up until now. Ecologically, they both bring a lot of challenges.
Yep.
Sycamore, on the other hand, does attract species. You know, it does support wildlife, not as much as oak, which seems to be a bit of a superstar. Willow, likewise, willow is way up there in terms of the number of insect species that it supports. Sycamore is a lot lower, but there's a lot of trees that are native that are around the same bar.
Yeah.
So as part of the scaffolding of the landscape going forward, I think that they offer an awful lot. I'm not sure about cherry laurel and rhododendron. I think that
I wouldn't
taking those out lock, stock and barrel might be the right thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think I agree with you. I think that we do need to be discerning and proactive, but
not angry with this.
Yes,
exactly.
That's it. It's like there was a conversation thread that we were having a while ago, and it kind of I didn't quite catch it in the moment. Joanna Macy's thing about holding actions. And on the one hand, when you resist what is, you know, the idea that what you resist persists. So you could say, well, don't resist what is, you know, because that'll only attract more of it. And yet what we were looking at the Ballymacraven River was what Joanna Macy might call the holding action. Stop.
Yeah.
You know, you must stop what you're doing. This is not acceptable. And I think one of the distinctions between one and the other is stop. We love you, and what you're doing is completely out of order, and you may not do it again without consequence.
Yeah,
you know,
but we will stay in relation with you.
Exactly. And so we're not othering you. We're not taking all of our shadowy stuff and dumping it on you. We're just holding space. You know, and I think that it's that's just a loose end that I'm pulling in out of the blue now as we're talking as it pops up.
That's great.
Wonderful. Féidhlim, that was extraordinary. Very, very inspiring. It's lovely to know that you can go into the world of environmentalism with somebody who is proactive and educated and also optimistic and empowering. You know, it's just lovely to sit in this space. You and Eleanor, I think, are planning on holding more eco-visioning workshops. I cannot recommend them highly enough. It was absolutely transformative and brilliant. So thanks for chatting to us, and thanks for everything you do, Féidhlim.
Thank you very much.
Amazing. It might be the topic might be hope, but I don't know if that's sounds too saccharine. But I felt very hopeful throughout. So thank you. But you can still
change comes to mind. Change or potential or something like that. Hope has mixed connotations. It's I know Joanna Macy again has spoken about hope and spoken about the challenge with hope is that you hope that somebody else will change. And now she's come up with a whole genre of work and books called active hope, where you actively hold on to a vision of the future that you want. But anyway, it's all in the mix.
How about vision?
Vision is cool.
Vision is change, cool. Active hope.
Yeah.
Love it.
Pinning the world down to one word is not something I'm terribly skilled at.
Well, regardless what Anthony is going to put, Anthony's just going to put Water Whisper on the episode, but it's been amazing.
Cool.
Thanks
a million, guys. Really appreciate it.
This has been Weshtern Philosophy. Follow us on all the socials at Weshtern Philosophy Pod. If you want to support the podcast, you can join our Patreon to help the show grow, or make a one-off donation via the Ko-fi link in the episode description. We'll be back next week with more chats and another topic. Slán.